Hello, and welcome to PK's webinar on increasing digital engagement in a post-COVID world. We're delighted to welcome Emily Collins from Forrester as our guest speaker for this virtual event. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm part of PK's marketing team. And before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that all attendees have been muted. We will be recording this event for future reference, and we encourage all attendees to leave any questions in our Q&A tool within the Teams platform. At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenters. From PK, we have Clay Waltonhouse, who serves as our Managing Director of Integrated Loyalty Solutions. Clay helps Fortune 500 companies create and implement new customer engagement strategies that accelerate growth and build loyalty. Our guest speaker is Emily Forrester's Customer Loyalty and Communities Coverage. Emily leads a team of analysts who help clients develop marketing strategies that drive customer obsession and growth. With that, I'd like to hand things over to Clay to get us started.
Great, thanks Elizabeth. So thanks everybody for joining today. Before we jump in, I thought I'd take just a minute to introduce PK for those who don't know us. You probably know Forrester well, so I'll spend just a moment kind of touching on who we are and what we do as a backdrop for today's conversation. Is a digital services and experience engineering firm, and we really think of ourselves as being experts in the moments that matter. And so much of our work really centers around helping brands and B2B companies rethink and remake their customer engagement models. And that's really what we'll be talking about today, is through the lens of digital engagement, especially considering all that's going on in the world around COVID. How should we be thinking differently about keeping people interactive and especially being, considerate around some of the sensitivities of the pandemic. So with that said, quick topic tee up in a little bit more depth for us. When we talk about loyalty on demand and this topic of how to respond in the moment with COVID-19, there's a few things we just want to level set on, which is the idea that this is really a time for some creativity and some new ways of thinking. So we're hoping to pull the thread on that conversation with all of you today. We will save some time toward the end of the discussion for a Q&A, so please jot down your questions, your thoughts, and we'd love to hear from you toward the end of today's call. So to ground us in a few things that we all know about the pandemic right now. First and foremost, there has been a legitimate and understandable reduction in consumer need for various products and services. And that's had a very material impact on many, many businesses, obviously. There's also been a pretty significant shift in lifestyle for many people, obviously spending more time at home, less time with others, etc. And this has really had an impact on consumer and buyer mindset, their orientations, their confidence, and ultimately demand. And so this, as a backdrop, really presents a question around, given this acceleration toward social distancing and a more digitally led world, how can we all adapt to that as marketers, as experience designers, as strategists, trying to keep the wheels on the bus of our business, but also be empathetic to the sensitivity of our consumers in this moment. So really what we're talking about is how do we maintain brand connection during these tumultuous times? How are we providing meaningful ways to interact digitally when people are spending time at home, and specifically beyond the core product and service that a brand may offer? And how do we do that knowing that engagement also is healthy for us from a business perspective, right? We know that there are strong correlations and linkages between engagement with the brand and someone's propensity to be loyal and to repeat purchase. So we're going to be talking about digital native companies and digital services firms because we believe that they really provide a blueprint, if you will, for strategy and leading capabilities in the space of digital engagement. So with that said, I'm going to hand it off to Emily. She's really going to ground us as someone who does a lot of research in this space around customer loyalty and talk us through a bit about what she's seeing in the market today from consumers and what it means for loyalty.
Thanks, Clay. All right, hello everyone. Okay, so I'm going to start out just kind of talking a little bit about the current state of loyalty. And, I think this year has been a surprising one for many of us. And one of the things that I have seen from a lot of the clients, as a loyalty analyst, I've always been a big advocate for caring about loyalty and the loyalty of your customers and building those relationships. But I think in this year, especially, we're seeing that, and I'm hearing from my clients that maintaining customer relationships and really earning their customer loyalty is an urgent priority. The pandemic has thrown many industries and many regions around the globe into an economic recession, and during those times, typically companies turn to their existing customers for support and to kind of shore up those existing customer relationships. And that's certainly something that we've seen happen in 2020. And actually, the CMO survey, which was published in June, they did a special pandemic edition. That survey showed that marketing leaders said retaining customers was 2 times as important as acquiring new ones. So that was really interesting data point. And I know that I feel this way. I know consumers feel this way. We as consumers and as marketers and experience designers feel like the COVID-19 pandemic has led us into uncharted territory. And Forrester has done some forecasting, and in every single scenario for recovery, we're forecasting U.S. marketing spend to fall by at least 28 to 30% through the end of 2021. And we're seeing this spend fall across things like headcount, services, tech, media, etc. And early on, we saw the consumer impact was pretty significant as well, and the consumer impact of the COVID-19 pandemic slowed spending, right? So consumers were anxious about an economic recession, and when we did some pulse surveys back in the spring, we found that consumers were in agreement that they were saving right now and kind of holding off on some of their spending. And certainly in some industries and some sectors, we've seen some recovery and some bounce back in terms of consumer spending. Forrester's Consumer Energy Index shows that those consumer risk perceptions track to changing case rates. So what that means is that as the number of COVID-19 cases rises again in certain regions or goes down, so do consumers' fear levels, their anxiety, their desire to protect against health and financial risk, as well as their fatigue around engaging with new brands and products. And globally, we've seen that optimism varies, right? So certainly the different countries' responses to the pandemic have been different, and culturally there are different sort of set points that consumers are at. So optimism in China looks a little bit in terms of economic recovery and improvement after the pandemic crisis lessens is much higher than in, say, the UK or the US. So although it's always important to understand consumer attitudes towards your brand or your industry, in this particular moment, it's also really important to understand consumers' natural outlook, right? Taking their emotional temperature to really understand how they currently feel. And by having that level of consumer insight and understanding, that's foundational for developing real empathy for your consumers and to be able to communicate with them in a much more authentic way, however you are planning to communicate with them. And certainly we all know and have looked at past recessions as sort of a kind of a gauge to understand maybe what we should be doing during this time. We know that studies of past recessions show that companies that continue marketing recover faster and with greater market share than firms that go dark, right? Marketing in a downturn is good for the economy, is good for recovery, because as companies start to pull back on their advertising, they leave empty space in consumers' minds for aggressive marketing to make strong inroads. And I'm sure many of you on this call have seen this quote from Peter Fader kind of floating around. So, the pandemic disproportionately affects companies, unevenly impacts companies, it unevenly impacts consumers, and recovery is not necessarily kind of a straight line upwards. And although we know we need to continue marketing, and marketers understand that earning customer loyalty is super important, before the pandemic, earning loyalty was difficult, and it's not any easier now, right? We know that loyalty, retention, and revenue have never told the whole story with loyalty. Loyalty has behavioral components and all of the interactions that a customer takes to maintain a relationship with a brand, but it also has emotional components, and the quality of the relationship is determined by how customers feel about those interactions. And we find that loyalty ebbs and flows in the same way that consumers change, right? It changes and grows, and consumers we've seen are pretty fickle. And so even before the pandemic, we were observing some big shifts in consumer attitudes that made earning loyalty hard. And I think across the board, whether it's with regard to digital transformation efforts or consumer behaviors, the pandemic has certainly acted as an accelerant to some of the things that we already saw happening in the marketplace. And one of those changes has to do with consumer attitudes towards technology and their agreement that technology is important to them. So in 2009, 31% of consumers agreed that technology is important to them, and compared to 64% of consumers in 2019. And that pandemic is forcing an acceleration of this, right? You think of all of the technology Luddites who have tried online grocery shopping for the first time, or are communicating and connecting with their family and friends and colleagues over Zoom for the most of their social interactions. And one of the things that we see is that the more consumers agree that technology is important to them and to their everyday lives, the more likely they are to experiment with wearables and chatbots and voice assistants and try new types of technology. But this attitudinal shift in experimentation and willingness to experiment goes beyond technology as well, right? And so this is the second attitude shift, which we see in that the number and the percentage of consumers who are always willing to experiment with new brands and products has also gone up pretty dramatically in the past 10 years. And so, as a loyalty advocate, and, if you're a loyalty marketer on this call, consumers are more willing to try new things isn't necessarily, the kind of behavior that you're looking to inspire. So certainly can make that experimentation can make earning loyalty and keeping loyalty challenging. And then the third attitudinal shift that we're observing, and that has been certainly accelerated by the pandemic, is around values-based consumers, right? More and more consumers are sort of voting with their wallets, and now 55% of consumers who would rather buy from a brand that reflects the consumer's personality, which includes values, even if it means bucking the latest trends. And this summer and continuing into now, there has been a lot of social issues that have come up that consumers are speaking out about, and are expecting brands to make a statement or take a stand or take authentic action to showcase and share those values. And this isn't just necessarily around social issues. When we think about values, we think about all of the different social and ethical beliefs that a company may choose to take action on or represent. And I think in the pandemic, especially, consumers are not just looking to brands on social issues, they're also looking to do business with brands that are treating their employees well and taking action on climate change and things like that as well. So the share of values-based consumers certainly continues to rise. But one thing that I want to be really clear about is that loyalty programs still have a lot of power during this time, right? Before the pandemic and including right now, loyalty programs are very popular among consumers. Consumers on average belong to 4 programs. I think something like close to 90% of consumers participate in at least one loyalty program, and their attitudes towards them are largely positive, right? 72% of consumers agree that loyalty programs save them money, And 58% of consumers agree that loyalty programs influence where they're making purchases. So they're definitely impacting their behavior. We also have consumer data that shows that loyalty programs kind of drive stickiness. So loyalty program members are more likely to agree with statements like, once I find a brand, I like to stick with it. These loyalty programs help companies identify their most loyal and engaged customers and give companies the tools they need to positively reinforce customer behavior. So, points and discounts get a lot of flack for kind of, being just incentives, but they also provide that positive emotional reinforcement that consumers need for their shopping behavior. And I love this quote from our online community of, loyalty programs remind me that I'm a smart shopper. So while, you don't want to go overboard with discounts and incentives, I certainly think that they have a role to play in sort of making customers feel good about their shopping choices. Loyalty programs also give consumers a reason to engage, especially at a time when they've never been more aware that companies want to collect their information to use for marketing and advertising purposes, right? So, you kind of get this. Loyalty programs provide that explicit value exchange and create that fully opted in and permissioned relationship that brands are craving, especially at a time when, we have all of these forces around data deprecation and, Google is deprecating the third-party cookie and all of this kind of stuff happening. So loyalty programs give you access to that super valuable first and then hopefully zero-party data as well. Because of all of these forces, right? Because of all of the benefits that loyalty programs bring, marketers do have really high expectations for their loyalty programs. They want them to retain existing customers. They want to use them to increase their customer lifetime value of their best customers. 15% of the marketers we surveyed want to use their loyalty programs to acquire new customers. So loyalty programs have opportunities to impact the relationship and expectations from marketers that they're going to impact the relationship at almost every stage of the customer life cycle. And the good news is that when done well, loyalty programs do drive growth. So, you can think about members of Nordstrom's loyalty program who are spending 4 times more and shopping 3 times more than non-members, or Chipotle, who doubled digital sales after launching their loyalty program in March of 2019. And at the beginning of this year, saw a massive uptick in members because of the utility that their order online and delivery capabilities of their app drove. So I read an article that a lot of the customers that Chipotle was acquiring into their program were actually new to Chipotle customers as well. So they're creating a database of contactable and addressable consumers because of the value and the utility of their rewards program. And then Nike, who I know PK works with, attributes a lot of the growth in their digital revenue from last year to the expansion of the membership program. And that's not the only benefit of their program, but certainly one. It is a strategic initiative, a corporate strategic initiative. And then I think, I would be remiss to mention the fact that, before the pandemic, every airline had a massively profitable program. And even in 2020, those programs are being used to secure loans and cash flow to kind of maintain their business productivity and business continuity. So loyalty programs are valuable. This year, we've seen lots of companies making quick adjustments to their programs and adapting their programs to the times. And some of this is happening in the terms and conditions, right? Extending status benefits, removing points expiration deadlines to make sure that customers who are enrolled in the program are getting the benefits and aren't being punished for circumstances that are out of their control. We've also seen brands like Sephora add philanthropic redemption options that are in line with maybe the strategic and social causes that the brand cares about. So Sephora has been very vocal in sort of anti-racism and retail efforts and incorporated some redemption opportunities for the National Black Justice Coalition to the program. I love the other 2 examples on this slide. Chipotle was really leaning into sort of the Zoom of it all for 2020 and kind of tapping into that connectivity over digital channels in its campaigns, and doing some interesting events that way. And then Hilton, for a brand that essentially lost 90% of its revenue in a matter of months, they started thinking about, okay, well, how can we connect with our customers and the things that they care about. So this is a screenshot from an email that one of my colleagues received. And if you scroll down in the email, it actually provides the recipe to the DoubleTree chain chocolate chip cookies that are so kind of revered. And there was a little video of like how to make a cocktail at home. So kind of really tapping into different ways to connect with customers and loyal customers and make them feel valued and appreciated, and really adapting the program to fit the needs of customers. And so as we think about where loyalty can go from here, I think the most important thing is to think about embracing a loyalty company mindset, right? Where loyalty programs are one of many tactics that your brand is taking advantage of to drive and build customer relationships. Now, this is something that I've been saying for many months and years now, but I think that this time period in 2020 has been particularly revealing about who has a loyalty strategy and who just has a rewards program. So when you think about the different ways that companies have showed up for their customers in this time, it's not always coming through a loyalty program or through points redemption options. A lot of times it's coming through customer service interactions and interactions that are owned by other parts of the business. And marketers, what I would say is all customer interactions have loyalty earning potential. And most of the marketers that I talk to, and I'm sure most of the clients that Clay talks to, inherently understand that loyalty is bigger than a program. And on this slide, you can see that nearly 2/3 of the marketers we surveyed in this study consider things like customer service and customer experience to be a part of their loyalty strategy. But actually coordinating it all is a big challenge, right? Because marketing has its own set of business objectives and customer goals and customer experience, and there's not always a lot of interchange and interplay amongst those groups. So when you think about how you can respond to customers during this time, there needs to be, and to the varying levels of anxiety or confidence that customers may have, empathy and flexibility and agility could not be more important. You really have to think through, where is your customer today? How can you, in every interaction that you have with them, be human, treating them as you would a friend or family member or colleague, be helpful, helping them solve the problems that they're having, not just sending them a promotion, and being handy. So really flexing to accommodate the differing and changing market conditions. And I think Clay is going to talk a little bit about some great examples of how companies have been flexing to meet those different needs, while remembering that consumer behavior is changing. Consumer and attitudes are constantly changing, and that what happened in the past is not necessarily indicative of what's going to happen in the future. And I think this is something that a lot of brands kind of came face to face with early on in the pandemic, when all of their propensity models and churn models were sort of thrown in the garbage because consumer behavior was changing so rapidly. So the models themselves just weren't accurate. But I think a few months ago, there were a lot of think pieces about how, is this the end of, in-store shopping, and people are going to be online? Are we never going to go back into an office again? And I think the pendulum is swinging back. And from a consumer perspective, we've seen that, yes, many consumers have tried out new digital behaviors. But coming out of the pandemic, while 21% of US online consumers plan to shop much more online, 45% are still hoping to revert to their normal shopping behavior soon. And I think, more recently, we've seen a lot of curbside pickup and buy online, pick up curbside, or pick up in store, kind of a return to that. So digital is not going away, but it kind of, again, will be for most people an enabler to maybe an in-purchase interaction. And this is where customer context is really critical, and that granular customer understanding is required to be successful right now. And I say granular because of that constantly changing conditions. You need to be able to have the data and the information you need to know where and when and what kinds of value you're even welcome to deliver. So I anticipate that we are going to see like a huge uptick in promotional activity in the next year. For brands that are struggling, they're trying to drive that next purchase. But next best offer is only one potential option for ways that you can deliver value to the customer. And really thinking through how can you filter your business objectives through that customer-centric lens to think about the information you might have to help a customer, that you can how can you help simplify things for them? The information that you provide may be something that you think they need, but it may be more likely to be a communication that shows that you care about them or show some genuine appreciation for their business and that you understand what their needs are. And I think this is where, yes, personalization has a huge opportunity in the buy phase. Companies are already pursuing that, but I think that personalization has an even bigger opportunity to cut through the noise and connect with customers across the life cycle. And when done well, we know that personalization helps take customer relationships to the next level. So 77% of consumers agree that they've chosen, recommended, or paid more for a brand that provides personalized service or experience. Personalization delivers that scarce resource, that consumers' focused attention and ROI. Even the most rudimentary personalization tactics invoke that cocktail party effect. So you want to think about content and experiences that are truly relevant to the customer's context in the moment to really cut through all of that brand noise. And certainly when I talk to companies, they have great intentions for personalization, right? They want to deliver a better, more individualized experience, but the execution tends to be where things get really messed up, and the customer is the one who feels all the pain. So only 5% of US consumers even say that email offers are timed well to their needs. And there are some consumers who don't want any personalization at all. They don't want their only 27% of US online adults say they're willing to let retailers use their personalization to personalize experiences. And an increasing proportion of consumers are actually taking active measures to limit the collection of their personal information. So the goal of personalization is to act on trust and build those trusted relationships. And so the best thing that you can do as a brand is to really respect your your customers' preferences and focus on 3 R's to deliver effective personalization. So you want to think about delivering relevance. And by relevance, I don't just mean the relevant product that's going to meet your business objectives, but how can you deliver value and provide utility, right? And how can you think about what's relevant to that person and their needs? Building emotional resonance, so creating the kinds of experiences that earn and reinforce loyalty, as well as showing restraint. So thinking through how can I show consumers and my customers, my loyal customers, that I'm respecting their preferences. And so as you think about the opportunities with your current loyalty program, you might be making some changes to the terms and conditions or to some of the benefits and flexing in the short term. But I just want to remind you that the biggest opportunity for differentiation going forward comes through how you deliver the program, not what you offer, but how you make that come to life for your loyal customers. So with that, I am going to pass it back to Clay.
Great. Thanks, Emily. So I think that's a really great survey of, the current state of loyalty and a lot of the nuance around the current situation related to the pandemic and many of the implications that brands, B2B and B2C, need to be thinking about. So what we're going to do in the next 15, 20 minutes or so is build from a lot of the themes that you heard Emily touch on and zero in a little bit more on this idea of digital engagement, given this imperative for organizations to keep their customers interacting, keep the brand top of mind, and keep people retained and loyal. So to reinforce a few things we heard from Emily in terms of the research, right, and the broader context around the consumer landscape with COVID, even though there's been a lot of disruption, there's some good signals here in terms of the opportunity for creativity and the opportunity to do some things differently and capture some consumer attention and interest and loyalty. So first and foremost, as we heard, consumers are open to sharing information when value is exchanged in return, right? They are still influenced by loyalty programs. They're willing to experiment and try new things, new brands, new products, new experiences, interacting with new content. And there is a positive orientation toward technology, right? So in this broader context of people spending more time on screen these days, people are open to that and are eager to engage in new and different ways. So there are some major advantages when we think about, some legacy industries versus some of these more modern emerging industries like digital services, streaming services, et cetera. And the advantages that these companies have do give them a platform, for lack of a better term, for success in this deeply digital landscape, right? One is that they are inherently organized around digital product, and they are deeply oriented toward experience, user experience as being a primary driver of their success. They also tend to have more mature and sophisticated churn management capabilities within the organization, and that really means that they are taking advantage of a deeper and broader user data set than many legacy industries might have. Whether you're a retailer or a hospitality brand, you may not have quite the breadth and depth of information on users that some of these digital platforms do. They're also leaders, early leaders anyway, in personalization and specifically content personalization. And obviously they are technology centric, right? So there are a number of things we can kind of take away from these business models, whether they are inherently paid subscription or not, in terms of how we all can be thinking about digital strategy, engagement, and how that relates to loyalty in the current context. So when we're thinking about engagement, we really define that as any interaction with the brand that is not in and of itself the transaction, right? So it could be visiting a website, it could be interacting around content in social channels, it could be even a peer-to-peer interaction that is facilitated by the brand. And where we've seen engagement strategy as a part of a broader loyalty framework really be the most successful and the most sophisticated is when brands have an idea of what we would call an engagement ladder, which is really, as proven through data science, what is the linkage of certain kinds of engagement to lifetime value? And how can you lead a particular user, a particular audience, or a group from one interaction with the brand to another in a way that leads to deeper affinity with the brand and, most importantly, continued patronage, tenure, loyalty. The other flip side of the coin on this topic is kind of the idea of the engagement flywheel, which is, I think, a term that many of you are probably familiar with and has been popularized by a number of very successful brands I'll touch on. But one orientation toward engagement is the idea of value realization, which is to say that as a user in a digital service context engages more with the full breadth of features in a particular service offering, they're often unlocking more value. They're getting more from that service, whether it's paid or free, and it's increasing their likelihood, their propensity to not only engage further, but be retained, be loyal, maybe even advocate for that brand. Another orientation is the idea of active use. So if use of a particular service or product is absolutely key to driving downstream retention and loyalty, how are we leading people proactively to use those new features that they may not have uncovered before, engage with content they may not have engaged with before, interact with the brand in a new and different way. And then the third element is this idea of compulsion loops or gamification. And this isn't necessarily a fit for all brands and all industries, but for some, it really is a natural extension of the user experience and can play into driving the right kinds of behaviors and building more affinity to that digital platform. So one thing that's important to recognize is that even though many of these digital services companies are significantly ahead of some of these legacy industries in this particular area of digital engagement and using sophisticated data science and experience engineering to drive the right consumer relationships, they don't have it all figured out. And I'm sure we've all heard many examples of personalization fails as one example of where there's still a lot of room for improvement. So just as one personal anecdote here, this is an email that I got, obviously, from Netflix in August. So hot, I'm out there on the water, I'm out there in the outdoors, I'm not inside a lot as much as possible. And they're trying to remind me of things that I've enjoyed in the past that I may want to rewatch. And what's the thing that they bring to me? A roaring fireplace in the middle of my living room. And you may have remembered what Emily was talking about in terms of context and how that relates to personalization being executed well and not well. And in this case, this algorithm, this data science was completely missing context in terms of why would I have watched this burning Yule log at home during the holiday period, perhaps, and why I might not have any interest whatsoever in watching that on an August hot night at home. So just to acknowledge that though we're using these kind of native digital companies as a framework for how to think about best practices and maturing capabilities in this space, there's certainly a lot of need for evolution, even from some of these leaders. So with that said, we're going to talk a little bit about 3 case studies, 3 different brands, one being a digitally native brand, or at least a digital service, an HBO, and then 2 non-inherently digital businesses, 2 retailers actually, who are doing some creative things and sort of expanding strategy in the space of digital engagement, all as part of this broader loyalty strategy, like Emily said. We'll also touch a little bit on how there are some direct integrations with a loyalty program play here that are important to think about as well. So HBO first, I'm sure all of you are familiar with them. They do a fantastic job around their core product, which is their content. They tend to get a lot of accolades around this content, and a lot of the loyalty in this space is really 100% tied to the quality of the content and whether or not it's what people want to be watching in that given moment. And if you can consistently provide that quality that keeps people coming back time and time again. The challenge here, of course, is that content is incredibly expensive to produce, and it's been a bit of a arms race, right? As companies like Disney Plus and Amazon have entered this space and are really investing in their own content production and studio capabilities. So there's an inherent need for these streaming platforms to really answer the question, what else can we do to build more value into the experience of our brand that is differentiated and extends outside that viewing window? So we kind of like to talk about it in terms of, building loyalty beyond pressing play. It's one thing to get people to come back and press play over and over again. It's another thing to get them to engage with multiple franchises on a platform or to engage in between the viewing windows. So we're going to talk a little bit about a recent series on HBO called Lovecraft Country. I'm sure some of you have seen this. It's kind of a sci-fi thriller series, but also has some very explicit themes related to racial issues and tensions in America, including some historic events. And what was really fascinating about what HBO has done recently in this space and trying to tackle loyalty and drive more engagement with the platform is they've really doubled down on what we've started to call this idea of transmedia, which is different kinds of media, different formats of media, and building out really robust content strategies around a particular franchise. So in this case, many podcasts really came out organically from these popular TV series and movies over the last few years. And some of the studios themselves have seen that as an opportunity, including HBO, to really sponsor their own branded content and their own podcast series in this space. HBO really took this one step further and created this whole digital experience around Lovecraft Country. It was called SANCTUM, and it actually included a whole bunch of different kinds of media that were richly interactive. So for example, there was a third-party virtual reality platform they used to host a number of interactive virtual reality events that included participation from artists and celebrities from outside their own circle. And they even went so far as to provide access to resources on the issues that were being directly and indirectly addressed in the TV series related to racial issues in America and racial justice. So why does this work? What does this do for HBO? Well, it creates new and more frequent ways to engage beyond that viewing window. And it's value added. It's entertainment. It's directly immersive content related to the franchise, and it taps into and helps fuel this broader cultural dialogue, which also has great relevance in the moment. It is in context of real systemic issues that our society is facing today. It also helps spur the virality of that content and feed those social networks. It's also helping to establish an engagement ecosystem that is cross-platform. So as people may turn on the TV to interact with the actual TV series, they're also opening their phone, of course, or interacting on their laptop or their iPad. And they've created this content to really seamlessly flow across even third-party podcast platforms and things like that. So it's really driving this deeper connection to not only Lovecraft Country as a TV series, but also to HBO as a platform, and helping to reset how people think about interacting with HBO beyond that immediate pressing play and the viewing window. So if we shift gears a little bit to a non-traditionally digital service company, Vans, a shoe company known for really their skate and surf culture and largely a younger audience, but they have a lot of people who really love that brand, who grew up with that brand, who are now older and remain fiercely loyal. So Vans is an interesting story that we can tell related directly to the integration of this idea of digital engagement, context, personalization, but also the intersection with a traditional loyalty program, or as we like to call it, really it's membership. And Vans Family is a program that has really been centered upon engagement from the time it was designed and launched. It's really all about kind of content and very brand aligned information, activities, events, and swag, candidly. So what's interesting about what Vans has done is they have built into the membership experience this polling and quizzes feature. And this is really giving customers the ability to raise their hand and offer zero-party data, like Emily was talking about earlier, that gives them more choice and control over their own experience and allows Vans to more deeply understand things that are harder to interpret from behavioral data itself, right? So things that really help us understand attitudes, orientations, desires. This is an example of two questions that are in this polling feature that are pretty fundamental to the experience of the Vans Family program. So one is really about how people relate to fashion and whether or not they're interested in getting more fashion information. The other is really about what they expect to see more of from the mobile experience and the Vans Family program. Two pretty obvious questions to ask for a shoe retailer. But more recently, what they've started to do is use this feature to actually gauge people's sentiment in the moment related to the pandemic. And I think this is really powerful, right? Because it's giving people the opportunity to say, you know, here's how I'm feeling. And it's giving Vans the power to be less tone deaf, right? To be more in tune with perhaps what people expect to hear from Vans right now, and whether or not they're really interested in engaging further. So it's helping them be a lot more sophisticated in how they understand not only the behaviors, but the emotions of their customer base, and specifically in the sensitive moment we're in now around the pandemic, and how that relates to optimism or uncertainty. So why does this work, right? Why does this integration with the loyalty experience and polling help feed this broader idea of digital engagement and building loyalty that way? So one is, obviously, it's a very effective way of getting real-time attitudinal insights that are otherwise difficult to gather at scale. That really feeds into a much richer and holistic progressive profiling strategy that then helps enable downstream personalization. And that personalization may be content, it may be offers, it may be product, and it could be experiences and events that people get invited to. It helps establish two-way communication, but it also gives that control and choice to the member in terms of what they're willing to provide as information, and it's incredibly transparent. So this really helps mitigate some of those issues Emily was talking about earlier with regards to data privacy and GDPR and many of the things that marketers are struggling with as it relates to those constraints. The last example we want to give is also a non-traditionally digital business, a retailer, a apparel manufacturer, Arc'teryx. And for those of you who know them, you know, they are highly technical. They go to market more as a higher end brand with very high quality apparel for outdoor pursuits. Though certainly, you know, a large portion of their customer base are not summiting Mount Everest every weekend. So what's been interesting about Arc'teryx is as they've followed perhaps in the footsteps of some other companies like an REI or others who really see their role as a lifestyle brand to add value beyond the core product they sell, Arc'teryx has done this as well, right? So they started to launch a number of events and educational opportunities, courses, that they were branded and hosted and facilitated by Arc'teryx educators. And during the pandemic, they took this whole thing digital, and they built a pretty robust content strategy around programming this idea of the climbing academy and building out a lot of digital content that kept people coming back, even if they weren't in the mind space or didn't have a need to buy another jacket or pair of pants or shoes or whatever the outdoor product might be. So this included things like digital clinics. It got a lot of their paid sponsored athletes involved. It also tied in quite a bit of their focus on issues and values and philanthropic topics that were important to them. So there was a lot of effort to really center on more diverse audiences who are participating in the outdoor community and help educate others around how to support those causes. They gamified the experience a little bit through photo competitions. And they also offered a number of services through this virtual platform, like Gear Advisor and other events, digital events like music concerts, product giveaways, etc. So why does this work for Arc'teryx? First and foremost, this is really the Arc'teryx brand manifest, right? If you took their market positioning and made that a content strategy and you made it digital, this is really that. This is helping people live the Arc'teryx lifestyle, really, in a digital format. It's also incredibly timely, right? So the entertainment value of reaching people at home when they're on their couches and spending less time at work, at the office, or spending time with friends and family. This reaches people where they are in the moment. And it also provided an outdoors call to action, which in the moment as well was relevant as people sought to socially distance, but still find ways to be active. It added very meaningful value for their customers beyond the core product. And it established a digital platform that really gave people accessibility to new ways to engaging with Arc'teryx and created more of a viral effect in the community of those who followed them. And ultimately, that really helped enable more peer-to-peer connection, more community, more participation in the outdoor culture that Arc'teryx wants to be a part of. So really establishing more of this brand ecosystem and many, many ways to think about engaging and getting value from Arc'teryx. So in summary, before we kind of turn it over to Q&A for the last 10 minutes, when we look across both digital service companies who are inherently a digital platform, as well as non-traditional digital services industries like retail or hospitality, travel, banking, etc., there really are 5 C's that underpin best practices around digital engagement and a broader loyalty strategy. One is, first and foremost, understanding your customer, right? And as Emily talked about, practicing empathy, really focusing on what does our audience need, what do they value, what do they appreciate, what do they enjoy, right? And make sure you're not talking to yourself as a brand and a business. The second is really the content. What is the content of the experience that you're going to offer? Is it experiences themselves, events? Is it education? Is it reading information and resources? Is it peer-to-peer connections? What really underpins your unique brand position in the market and your value proposition that people will value? The third is capability. So this is really all about those rich customer profiles, as well as the ability to automate a lot of these more complicated journeys and driving the idea of that next best feature for a particular customer, which is where curation comes in, right? How do you lead the right audience to the right set of features or the right experiences? How do you come to understand engagement pathways through your products and services and content? And how do you lead people in that right direction? And then, of course, the fifth at the end of the day is all about the calculus. How do you really know that this is working? Many brands struggle with, engagement from the perspective of, is it actually directly driving a purchase? Can we make the case that this is driving ROI, or do we just have to believe? So how do you set up testing? How do you attribute ROI? How do you experiment and take a test and learn approach? So with that said, we hope you found this valuable, and we're going to turn it over to Elizabeth for the Q&A portion of the event.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Clay and Emily for sharing these insights. It looks like we've had a few questions come through during this time. So it sounds like we have a participant wondering, how are companies measuring improving the ROI of engagement?
I can take a stab at that one, and then Emily, if you want to chime in, please feel free. So, what we've observed that I think has been the most advanced way of doing this is a cohort-based measurement model. So where you're actually able to run tests related to engagement activities against discrete audiences and have a holdout group such that you can actually control, and get healthy signal from the data. And ultimately, our data science team and the data science teams we've worked with on the client side are, using a variety of different statistical methods to try to understand the weighted importance of certain kinds of engagement and how that relates to purchase. So you may find that, for example, downloading a mobile app and using it frequently is a stronger indicator of downstream loyalty than visiting the website, just as a very overly simplistic example. So that would be my orientation to that answer, would be, to have really robust data science and cohort-based measurement models.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add there is that when it comes to engagement, which it's important to really think about how you're defining engagement as well. So there, are behavioral components to it. I think, I think thinking about all of the different types of interactions a customer might have outside of the purchase. But engagement also implies something more than just behavior. And so I'd also encourage to think about, the involvement and measuring the involvement and the emotions of the customer in that time too. So not just what are they doing, but how much time are they spending? What's their intent? Kind of what are their perceptions, those types of things. And that as part of a loyalty program, you actually have sort of that identified customer to gauge it against, which is nice because it's not just sort of in a vacuum of this person does a lot of this. You can actually tie it to the business value as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, it looks like we have a participant that says content marketing is a huge topic for them, but the level of effort and cost to do content at scale has stopped them from making progress. So is there any brands, have you guys seen any brands that address this challenge?
Yeah, I hear that one a lot in terms of the level of effort and the perceived cost of content marketing. I think a lot of traditional legacy industries, retail, hospitality, et cetera, content operations is not really part of their historical, core competency. And so there's a real fear about, how many people do we have to hire? And how quickly does content proliferate when you're talking about doing it in a personalized way, right? So what I've seen work well is approaching it really almost like a proof of concept, a POC, where you can create a content strategy around a narrow slice of the business. So if you're a retailer, perhaps you choose a particular product or a product category. You build out a content strategy, you create that content, and then you run your engagement marketing journeys around that content, and you set up robust testing around that. And that can really help limit the scope and help prove the model or not for a particular brand. Emily, anything you'd add to that?
I don't think that I'd add anything specific. I mean, certainly in the advertising space, there are like creative optimization, creative ad tech tools that help you scale content. So I think that in some cases technology can help, but probably only once you've taken the steps that you suggested, Clay, to really test and prove out a model. Technology is not usually the first step in any process, or should it be?
Right.
Great. Well, it looks like we are getting to the top of the hour. So for our final question, we have a participant who has asked, have you seen any companies reorganize or recruit differently in order to shift business in this sort of direction?
Short answer for me, I'm sure Emily talks to folks who are doing this all the time. Short answer is yes, absolutely. Especially as you think about these more native digital businesses that are organized around a product structure internally. I've seen a lot of retailers, telcos, insurance companies, banks who are now working to reorganize in a similar model, and putting cross-functional Scrum teams in place around either specific parts of a customer journey or specific products, specific channels, but really seeking to kind of break down those organizational silos and put data and insights around the end customer more at the heart of the work that the organization does, and speed up the velocity of the work itself.
Yeah, and I think, obviously your ability to hire depends on sort of what mode your company is in right now. But even if there's not budget to hire new people, thinking through like upskilling existing resources to kind of, and really focusing on delivering value to the customer as like the primary objective around training and hiring and things like that. And I think, Clay, your point about that increased collaboration is really important because as I had mentioned, like earning loyalty isn't just a marketing thing. It kind of involves everyone and every interaction point. So to the extent that you can connect your marketing resources with store and digital, so that ultimately you're all pushing towards a more integrated and cohesive client experience or customer experience. That's really important.
Great point, Emily.
Fantastic. Well, I'd love to thank both Clay and Emily again for sharing their insights and expertise. You'll see on this slide that we really encourage everyone to check out the PK website to continue conversations around digital engagement and loyalty. We've had a number of recent articles and posts that are actually really relevant to today's conversation, including our Media Digital Experience Index, as well as some recent media interviews and blog posts around digital engagement. So at this point, we will be concluding the webinar, and we hope that you found today's content useful and insightful, and appreciate your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Emily.